Hosted by you/Carl 1961. The Priest and the Dying Man. I entered the hospital, stepping out of the heavily falling snow and gusting wind into the comfortably warm interior of the lobby. I brush snow off of my dark overcoat as I stride determinedly down the lobby to the elevators, my face solemn, briefcase in hand. I enter an elevator and get off on the 7th floor. I walk to the nurse's station. A middle-aged nurse with a severe face looks up from her computer. Yes? I'm here to see Mr. Nelson in room 26. Her tone is officious. I'm afraid he can't see any visitors right now, his condition is critical and... I pull open my overcoat enough for her to see the white clerical collar around my neck. Her face softens. So does her voice. Oh. I'm sorry, Father. Yes, of course, come with me. She gets up and comes around and guides me down a corridor. Did he request that you see him? She asks me. No. But I know he's dying and I thought he might want some spiritual support and guidance, I answer. I'm not so sure, Father. He refused to let the hospital chaplain see him. He had some rather colorful language for him. I have to at least give him a chance before he passes. She stops outside room 26. He's in here. She lowers her voice. He probably won't make it through the night. I nod and thank her. She opens the door for me and I enter. I look at the dying man on the hospital bed, hooked up to machines, an oxygen mask covering his face. I regard him somberly. Robert Nelson, age 72, dying of pneumonia. His face heavily lined, thin and ravaged by a lifetime of strife and hardship. His long gray hair is spread out over the pillow behind him. There is an old scar, several inches long, that notches his right temple, running down the side of his head. He is thin to the point of emaciation. His eyes are closed and he appears to be sleeping. For several moments there is only the sound of his labored breathing and the slightly irregular beeping of the electrocardiogram. I remove my overcoat and place it in the empty chair by the bed. I leave my gloves on. I open my briefcase and remove my purple stole, draping it around my shoulders, then pick up my Bible. I clear my throat, then speak softly. My son, I say, feeling a moment of absurdity, as I always do, saying the word, a man in his early 30s addressing a man old enough to be his grandfather as his son. The old dying man stirs and mutters in his sleep. My son, I repeat in a slightly louder voice. He stirs again and slowly opens his bleary, bloodshot eyes. They look around without focus for a moment, then anchor upon me, a young, bearded man in a dark suit with a white collar and a stole. His eyes narrow balefully when he realizes what I am. My son, I continue softly, time has grown short. Your hour is at hand. Do you wish to make confession and have me absolve you of your sins? His eyes bore upon me for a moment, then he struggles to find his voice. His words are muffled and incomprehensible due to the oxygen mask covering his lower face. He fumbles with it and pulls it down. His voice is a weak, liquid wheeze, his lungs are full of fluid. Go to hell. The 8-year-old boy watches with fearful wonder from under the kitchen table where he cowers. The man in the sweat-stained undershirt argues with the woman in the frayed and faded house dress. No, I wanna know. Who is he? Who you been fucking when I ain't around here? None of your fucking business. The woman shrieks at him. I fuck who I want whenever I want. Bitch. He slaps her brutally. She staggers back. He removes his belt from the loops of his tattered pants, doubles it over and raises it above his shoulder. I'll put you in your fucking place where you belong. He screams, swinging the belt at her wildly. Don't touch me. She screams and darts out of the dingy kitchen, the man behind her, brandishing the belt, yelling frenzied obscenities. The boy watches from his low vantage point as the man freezes in the doorway, lowering the belt and backing away from something in the other room, his eyes suddenly wide and alarmed. Put that down. Don't. A gunshot pierces the boy's ears, following by a shrill ringing sound. Blood explodes from the man's chest. He stumbles back and collapses to the grimy kitchen floor. The woman re-enters, aiming the smoking .38 revolver at the still, bloody figure on the floor before her. An involuntary whimper escapes from the boy's lips and the woman spins in his direction, her eyes locking on him and narrowing. She approaches him, face set in a vengeful scowl. This is all your fault, she hisses, raising the revolver, its dark bore seeming to fill his vision. He screams, a plea he never finishes. Mommy, don't. Another gunshot. A yellow flower blooms in his vision and suddenly he is lying on his side, the right side of his head burning and warm moisture trickling down his face. From his sideways perspective he sees the woman raise the .38 to her own temple. A final gunshot and she joins the man sprawled on the ground. He lies there in shock, thinking he is dead, ears ringing from the blasts and bleeding from the bullet that grooved his skull. He begins to gasp. He is alive. My son, I persist, unperturbed, please. Death draws nearer. You can still be saved, but there isn't much time. God never saved me, my whole life. He gasps. The boy, 10 years old, lies shivering upon his small bed. His foster parents' home is poorly heated and his blankets are thin and threadbare. His stomach growls. He is hungry. They didn't feed him today. They were punishing him for missing a spot while mopping the kitchen floor. They punish him most days. Sometimes they'll toss him their scraps if he acts like a good dog and does tricks for their amusement. They make him eat them off the floor. He waits in bed with dreadful anticipation, knowing what is to come. He hears the creak of footsteps approaching outside his room. His door creaks open, then closes quietly. He can smell the whiskey on his foster father's breath. He hears him begin to fumble with his clothes. He closes his eyes tightly, resigned to what is about to happen. God's love is unwavering and his mercy is infinite. Bullshit. God had no love or mercy for me, my entire life. The young soldiers trekked on through the jungle, through the mosquitoes and the sweltering thick air. They had been moving all day and it was now nearly sunset and time to set up camp soon. The young man is bringing up the rear, hunched forward under his 70 pounds of gear. He nudges back his helmet to wipe sweat off his brow, scratching distractedly at the scar on his right temple. Ahead of him is Rick, his only friend in the whole platoon. Rick has short curly red hair and freckled cheeks. He is from Detroit. He wants to own a used car dealership after he returns to the States. Rick is quietly singing California Dreamin' under his breath. He throws a look back at the young man. You still with us, Nelson? Barely, the young man pants. Shit, I hear you. All this fucking humping we're doing takes it out of you. Yeah, I'd rather be humping something else. They both chuckle. Hey, Bobby, if you could ball Raquel Welch or Jacqueline, what's her name, that British chick, who would you go for? Why not both at the same time? They laugh. The young man smiles quietly to himself. He has a girl back home. He takes her picture out of his shirt pocket and looks at it for the 1000th time. She says she'll wait for him. It happens fast and comes without warning. There is no premonition, no tense moment of uneasy silence. There is the sudden unmistakable staccato pattern of Soviet-manufactured machine guns firing from the jungle ahead of them. The air is full of the green streaks of tracer rounds like hellish darts. 4 men are instantly riddled and hit the ground spasming. Ambush. The young man hears the squad leader scream and the remaining men drop to the ground and return fire. He looks to his left and sees Rick, his face pressed to the ground, eyes wide with terror. For a moment their eyes meet. In front of him, 10 feet away, a young smart-assed Brooklynite named Watkins is writhing and screaming for his mother, his intestines spilling out of his ruptured abdomen and piling around him like sausages. Not far away from where Watkins is dying, a soft-spoken black kid from Alabama named Tyson is staring blankly at the blue sky above with his one remaining eye, he caught a round in the other. He fires crazily into the jungle until the M16 runs out. He is fumbling for a fresh magazine when he hears something that stops him cold, a sinister whistle from above, getting louder. Look out, Bob. He hears Rick scream a second before his friend crashes into him, knocking him clear a split second before the incoming mortar obliterates him. An explosion of earth, grass and shredded bits of flesh and bone. He lies dazed for a moment, ears ringing from the blast, then glances over to where Rick had been. There is nothing there but a smoking crater. Fragments of his friend's charred uniform rain down from the sky, followed by his twisted, blackened helmet. He screams Rick's name but can't hear his own voice over the ringing in his ears, so like that long ago day in his parents' kitchen. The Lord works in mysterious ways, I counter. You nor any man can presume to understand his will. My whole life, he never showed me anything but pain. A certain amount of suffering is to be expected in this life. Suffering and pain enlighten and humble us so that we can better understand Christ's love and his sacrifice. He died for nothing. We all do. He turns off the sidewalk onto the walkway leading up to her house. He is smiling but his eyes are still haunted by his memories of the jungle. And of Rick. He had taken a taxi here straight from the airport and is still in his uniform. He pauses outside her door and takes out the small jewelry box that contains the ring he bought from a pawn shop on the way. He rings the bell and waits. The door opens and she stands there, even more beautiful than he remembered the last time he had seen her 2 years before. He waits for her face to fill with joy at the sight of him. He waits for her to return his smile. Instead, her face crumples into a snarl of rage and her eyes darken. Before he even sees her hand move, she had slapped him viciously. He is stunned. In the next instant, she has spit on him. "Get out of here, baby killer." Before his reeling mind had even begun to process any of it, the slap, the spit, the insult, she has slammed her door, the sound like the lid of a coffin slamming shut. He will never see her again. His cheek wet and stinging, his heart pierced, he shuffles back down the walkway to the sidewalk, his shoulders sagging. He tosses the wedding ring into her trash can before he leaves. That is not true. The love of God and His Son shine upon all men. But some men refuse to see it. You can shove God's love up your ass, preacher. "Please, my son," I said, my voice betraying the sense of urgency I feel. "Now is not the time for blasphemy or anger. This is the time for reconciliation. You must confess your sins and beg the Father Almighty for His forgiveness if you wish to feel His glory in the hereafter." Maybe he should beg my forgiveness. The middle-aged man stands before the foreman's desk in his small glass-walled office off the factory floor. He speaks with desperation. "Mike, you can't do this to me, this job is all I got." "It's not my decision, Bob. I've told you that already." "Mike, I've worked here almost 30 years. Another year and I can get my pension and retire. This isn't easy for any of us, Bob. You're not the only one getting hurt. 5,000 other guys are losing their jobs, too. The owner's shipping the company overseas. Cheap labor. Maximizing profits. I don't agree with the greedy cocksucker, but that's how business works these days. Pleading now. Mike, I ain't qualified for anything else. I don't even have a high school diploma. I'll be out on the streets. I'm sorry, Bob, really, I am. I always liked you. There's nothing I can do. If you don't atone, you will be lost, I warn him. Do you realize that? You must repent and make an act of contrition if you wish to be saved. I look at him in desperation. There isn't much time left. He is fading before my eyes. He speaks with great effort, a force of will, and the gasps between his words are longer and heavier than before. I'd rather be lost than spend eternity kissing his ass. The old man, ragged and unwashed, flails back and forth between them like a ragdoll, pummeled mercilessly by the three large teenaged boys laughing with malevolent glee. Why don't you get a fucking job, you worthless piece of shit? One jeers before smashing his fist in the old man's already bleeding mouth. People like you are the scum of the earth. A second one chimes in, driving his fist into the old man's stomach. You think you can leech off decent working people, people who actually contribute to society, like a fucking parasite, for a living, old man? You make me fucking sick. The third sneers before hitting him from behind in the kidneys. You should be exterminated. The first one screams and kicks him in the crotch. The old man collapses to the trash-littered pavement, gasping and writhing, beaten and bloody. The three boys, laughing and whooping, hop back into their expensive sports car and speed off, leaving him there. Gradually the pain abates somewhat and eventually he painfully pulls himself to his feet. His tin can is crushed and empty, like Rick's helmet. He thinks fleetingly, they had robbed him of the scant amount he had earned that day panhandling. He spits out blood, then begins to cough raggedly. The coughing has been getting worse for days. He has some idea what it means. He can sense his time is coming soon. He looks at me a final time. He is very pale and his eyes are glassy. He is at the moment of extremis. He smiles for the first time, defiantly. His last words escape on the outrush of his final breath. Fuck, God. His eyes close and he goes limp. There is the shrill, steady tone of the electrocardiogram as he flatlines. He is gone. I hear the nurse running down the corridor toward the room. I lower my head. I have failed. Falling and falling, drifting down into the black depths of oblivion in a slow spiral. For the first time in his miserable existence he feels peace. And in the final second, before his consciousness dissipates and the blackness swallows everything forever and ever, he feels something else he has never experienced before. Joy. The nurse gently covers his face with the sheet. She notes the time on the wall clock. A moment of respectful silence, then she asks me, "Were you able to help him, Father?" I shake my head, speaking with genuine regret. No. His anger was too great. He could not be saved. I'm sorry. So am I. She leaves. I give him the last rites even though I know it is useless, then I too leave. In the elevator again, back down to the ground floor, I remove my gloves, which I have worn the entire time, and stare thoughtfully at the palms of my hands. I stare at the faint, circular scars in the center of each. I try so hard to save so many. It is my duty here on earth. And so often my efforts are in vain. So many are blinded by their own egos, their pride, their vengeance and anger. They refuse to see the glory of my Father. They refuse to be redeemed. But still I try. As I will again and again, until my Holy Father calls me back home, where I will sit at his side and rejoice in his splendor. Home. Where we shall both bask in the glory, the sweet screams and wails of the tortured multitudes, more magnificent than the most beautiful music ever composed by the most gifted musician who ever existed in this mortal realm. I wish I could have saved that man's soul. My Father could have used another slave in his kingdom. But there will be plenty more who I can perhaps reach. Plenty more who can still be saved. Smiling sadly, I exit the elevator, cross the lobby, and step back outside into the windy, snowing dark.